Are you okay? I really thought that I just broke my camera. Hi, if you're new here, I'm so sorry about that. Welcome to the channel. My name is Kylie. Good to have ya. So today, as you saw by the title, it is my part 2 of everything that I watched in April. I went over this in my last video on Friday, but I watched over 30 movies this month, and so I just had to break it up into 2 parts. So in Friday's video, I ended up talking about 15 movies, and today I will be talking about 17 movies. So I'm really not in the mood to give a long intro today. Let's just jump into it. So the first movie we're going to talk about is Prey, that came out in 2007. An American family on holiday in Africa becomes lost in a game reserve and stalked by lions. I only gave this one 1.5 stars because it's honestly just nothing special. I love creature features. It's honestly not a bad movie, it's just pretty lazy. It follows almost the exact same formula as Jurassic Park, but obviously the lions aren't in enclosures, they're just out in the range. So it's basically just the same concept, but lions are nowhere near as cool as dinosaurs. So I wasn't really into it, and obviously it being a more low-budget film, you could definitely tell how they cheated a lot of the scenes. By that I mean you could just very obviously tell that most of these people were never really in danger. So that kind of took some of the tension out of it for me. It's just a little bit dull, a little bit repetitive. It's not one that I'm gonna revisit, but it's honestly not bad. Up next is a movie that I'm probably gonna spend a little bit more time talking about. It's honestly one that I maybe should have given its own review. I just don't really have time to do that right now, but the movie is called In the Earth. As a deadly virus ravages the world, Dr. Martin Lowry embarks on a mission to reach test site ATU-327A, a research hub deep in the arboreal forest. The arduous journey, guided by Park Scout Alma, is set back by a nightmare attack that leaves the two bruised and shoeless. When they run into Zach, a man living off the grid, they gradually accept his help. Zach's intentions aren't exactly what they seem, however, and a path out of the forest and into safety quickly fades as the line between myth and science blurs. This was a movie that was directed by Ben Wheatley, and now I definitely am going to try to seek out his other projects. It was one of the most surreal experiences that I have had in a theater. It's the second movie I've seen back in theaters, and I kind of feel like it is one that you should see in a theater. But also, that being said, the sensory overload is really, it's a lot. It's really overwhelming. They do even have a trigger warning in the beginning if you're photosensitive and stuff like that. It's because they have so many of these psychedelic sequences that are really hard to explain if you don't know what's going on. Oh, I should let you know how many stars I gave it. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was a really, really good film. And all I said in my review was, I feel like I just saw God. Before I explain that though, I just want to read out one of the other reviews that I saw. Someone said, "Fuck elevated horror. All my homies hate elevated horror." That's fair. Like, a lot of people don't really understand elevated horror, and so then they just end up hating it. And this is elevated horror definitely to an extreme. Another example of elevated horror would be the films by Robert Eggers, The Lighthouse especially, which is a movie that I wasn't really that into. So In the Earth falls into that category. It's a bit like some of Robert Eggers' films. Hereditary and Midsommar, I guess I would consider elevated horror as well. But Ari Aster himself even says they're not horror movies, they're more drama films. I suppose that's what In the Earth is, but there is a lot of body horror. Just everything about this movie appeals to all of your senses, so the body horror is really intense. So in doing that, it appeals to touch and pain. Then, as I mentioned, there are a lot of really psychedelic sequences, and so it appeals to your auditory and visual senses. The only things that it doesn't appeal to, obviously, are taste and smell, but everything else, it's an overload. And getting back to what I said when I said I feel like I just saw God, time to explain that. So what I got out of this film is basically that the whole thing is an allegory for surrendering to magic mushrooms. There is an example of someone in the film that clearly just is not of the right mental capacity to understand, and I don't know the right word for this. Basically, this character's brain chemistry just didn't mesh with it, and for that reason, this character was kind of the example of what you don't want to happen. Also kind of a message there in that magic mushrooms are not for everybody. And then of course you have the characters that are sort of able to submit to this ride and very much connect with nature in a way that I don't feel has really been depicted on screen before. At least maybe not in a horror movie, I don't know. Some parts of the plot plot, I would say, are a little bit messy, and the pacing was not totally it for me. That's why I gave it 4 stars, not 5. But I think the whole thing was a really good message, and if you're not gonna get it, you're not gonna get it. I don't think that most people will like this film, but I think I've said before, if you're a very open-minded and more trippy, spiritual individual, then I think you'll like the movie. And honestly, maybe you won't like all the other stuff, you won't like the message, but if you love gore, you would probably also like this movie. So there's that. Do with that information what you will. I know that honestly most people will not like the movie, but that's fine. Up next, I watched the unrated director's cut of The Grudge from 2004. I don't think I need to give a synopsis, it's a pretty popular film, but I only gave it 1.5 stars, and I don't know if it's because I watched the director's cut, but that movie's just not really for me. That was the second time that I watched it though, so I have seen the theatrical cut, it just wasn't memorable, like I didn't remember a thing about the movie. And the next time I watched it, I was also very underwhelmed. I think where the movie did earn some credit for me was the ending of the film. I don't really know how different it is, the theatrical cut to the director's cut, but the ending went pretty crazy in the director's cut. But that was kind of the only moment that had me on edge. The rest of the movie didn't really scare me at all. Story didn't do it for me. I don't know. I feel pretty bored by The Grudge. It really makes me want to try to watch the original, which I think is called Ju-on Origins. Kind of want to see what that's all about because sometimes American remakes are just not good. I just don't really have a lot to say about that movie. It doesn't really do a good job of keeping me engaged, and I love Sarah Michelle Gellar, but I mean, her character was really boring, so I don't know what you want me to do about that. So I'm going to move on now to Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Now, I only gave it 1.5 stars just because on a technical level and a storytelling level, I don't think that movie has any business being as long as it is, but I did do a little Discord watch party with a couple of my friends, Leanne, Seb, and Tiago, and it's super fun to watch with your friends. Also, Jason Takes Manhattan, I believe, is in my top 5 of the franchise, maybe top like 7 or 8 or something. Because honestly, I think in terms of entertainment value, especially if you're watching it with friends, I would give it like a 7 out of 10. But I have done a full review on that movie, but that was almost like a year ago at this point. On my Patreon, I actually reacted to my first video and my first review of Friday the 13th. A mess. My whole Friday the 13th series was the first one I ever did on my channel. A mess. Not something I love to revisit, but if you do want to see my full review on Jason Takes Manhattan, then it's there. Moving on though, up next, I watched the movie World War Z, and I actually watched it for a collab that I did with Leanne and Seb of would you survive these horror movies? Spoilers, no, I would not survive World War Z. But you know that movie, right? Fast zombies, Brad Pitt, military propaganda. You know World War Z. I just gave it 4 stars and I said, yo, forgot how good this movie was. Enough said, it's a really good movie. The action is good, obviously Brad Pitt's performance is good. Fast zombies honestly really do scare me, and the extras that they had for this movie really put in work. I mean, those zombies, they all looked great. If it's one that maybe you haven't seen since it came out, or because for me it had been several years since I had seen it, and it really is good. It is worth revisiting. Up next, I sort of watched The ABCs of Death. 26 directors, 26 ways to die. Inspired by children's educational ABC books, the film comprises 26 individual chapters, each helmed by a different director assigned a letter of the alphabet. The directors were then given free rein in choosing a world to create a story involving death. Keeping it very real with you, I gave this movie a 1/2 star. That might not be entirely fair because I do think that there was some talent behind the movie. I think some of the directors did a pretty good job, but despite how good some of the stories were, the production value was still extremely low. It was just not a good looking film. It doesn't really matter which segment you're watching, none of it really looks like professional cinema, and that's not my main issue. My main issue is that some of the directors, I don't want to say that they have no talent because it does take talent to do whatever they did, but a lot of the stories were poop. Just a So they go alphabetically, right? I made it to F is for fart, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. Okay, up next, I watched Demonic Toys, which is from 1992. A botched bust on a pair of arms dealers inadvertently leads to the raising of a 66-year-old demon with the power to bring toys to life as his personal minions. Okay, so I gave this movie 2 stars, and honestly, in terms of entertainment value, I might have given it a little bit more, but it is a really bad film. In my review, I literally said, oh my god, it's so stupid. Everything about it, hilariously bad. What a gem. Yeah, I don't have too much more to say. I think that a lot of the practical effects are just a lot of fun, especially with the toys. There is some sort of problematic dialogue that is very outdated and just kind of makes you cringe. But other than that, I really didn't have any other problems with the movie. It's just one of those ones that's so bad that it's good. I'm gonna keep it around for sick days. I think it's a movie that'll make me feel good on days when I'm feeling down. I posted to my horror Instagram story of me watching the movie and just cracking up. Cause oh my god. I had an edible that night. That's why I was so high and I was watching that movie and it was just the time of my life. So I don't know if your enjoyment of the film would be contingent upon you also being stoned off your ass, but that is something to consider. If you're a fellow cannabis lover, then this is probably going to be a good film for you. Okay, moving on to a movie called Death of Me that came out in 2020 actually. A couple on holiday on a remote South Pacific island awaken one morning with a hangover and no recollection of what transpired. When playing back a video of the previous night, they see that they participated in a local ritual that somehow ends with him murdering her. This is directed by Darren Lynn Bousman, who, as we know, is at the helm of many of the Saw movies, but this movie was so bad, you guys. I only gave it 1 star, and again, I feel compelled to read what I wrote on Letterboxd. I said, oh, we have this wonderful idea that's never been done before, but let's present it with super common tropes and cliches because why not? Signed, whoever the fuck wrote this script. That basically sums up my feelings. I was just so disappointed in this film. It presented such an interesting premise. Neither of these people remember that she literally was murdered by him the night before, and then they just take the route of all these really stereotypical cliches. The story, despite having an amazing premise, doesn't end up being anything funky fresh or different or unique or cool. Just one of the biggest letdowns, because upon reading the synopsis, I was like, I'm watching this film immediately. And then when I was less than halfway through, I was so bored because I was like, oh, you're not gonna run with this super cool idea. Okay, got it, cool. So yeah, super frustrating. That's why it gets 1 star. I don't care how well the story came together because it just relied on so many lazy tropes. It's definitely one you can skip, I promise you. Okay, moving on to the next movie, which would be Pumpkinhead from 1988. Believe it or not, this was my first time watching the movie. A man conjures up a gigantic demon called Pumpkinhead to destroy the teenagers who accidentally killed his son. So I gave this movie 2.5 stars, and I wanted to give it more, but it has a lot of problems. But first I'm gonna say everything that I liked about it. So the practical effects I think were fun. I thought the monster looked pretty good. I also think that the movie is stylized as hell. I loved the lighting. It was such a good looking film. And that was kind of surprising because, unless I'm mistaken, it was more of a B movie back then. Kind of a cult classic, definitely not a mainstream classic, right? So I was kind of shocked how good this movie looked, but the reason why I only gave it 2.5 stars and the reason why I found it to be maybe a little bit below average is because honestly, the movie kind of is so bad that it's good. The plot is super messy, and I wasn't a fan of the pacing because so much nothing happened for, I don't know, like the first 30 minutes, 45 minutes of the film. I just don't think that the buildup needed to be that long because I feel like the main reason to watch this movie is for the monster. I don't really care too much about the story. The characters were not well fleshed out at all. I was kind of just waiting and waiting for this inciting incident that should have really come within the first couple of minutes of the movie. And I know that I'm saying I would rather that it just have a very basic slasher formula, but I do think that's what this movie should have been. But anyways, like I said, the movie was stylized as hell. I also really loved the location of it. I thought the production design was amazing. Definitely just not what I expected. It was a lot more technically well made of a film than I thought it was going to be. I definitely recommend it. Like I said, so bad that it's good, but it's a very charming film. Okay, up next, oh my gosh, one of my favorite movies that I watched this month, and that would be Orphan. This movie came out in 2009, and hopefully you've seen it, but if not, a married couple with a rocky past adopt 9-year-old Esther to fill the void created by a recently stillborn baby. However, Esther is not quite who she seems. I gave this movie 4.5 stars, and I gave it a heart. I think it was such an amazing film. So this is actually more of a drama, and I'm not the biggest fan of dramas. I mean, there definitely still is some horror in in this movie, but it definitely felt like more of a drama to me. And I mean, well, okay, that's not to say that there is not plentiful action in this movie, because there is, but for it being a drama that is also 2 hours long, I was gripped. I was invested. My eyes were glued to the screen for those full 2 hours. Everything with the story and the pacing, it all felt earned. I didn't feel those 2 hours at all. The time really flew. It was a thoroughly entertaining film. And also, no spoilers obviously, but that twist, that messed me up. That really got to me. Because I knew that there was going to be a twist, but never in my wildest dreams did I think that was going to be the twist. Which, by the way, can we talk about the power that this young girl holds? Isabel Fuhrman. She rocked my world. She rocked my world. I would love to talk more in depth about that movie someday, but today is not that day because I have a lot more movies to get through. But that is one of the movies I watched that I would most highly recommend. Actually, you know what? At the end of this video, I will do my top five movies that I watched this month. Oh, also before I move on though, Vera Farmiga is in that movie and I just adore her. So you already know, she brought it. She performed so well in this movie. Okay, moving on now to a movie called Lippy. That was actually a short film that I watched on Hulu. Two teenage friends caught shoplifting must face the wrath of an unforgiving security guard. So I gave this short film 1 star, and I didn't write anything about it on Letterboxd either. There's not too much to say. It's literally a 5-minute long short film, and it's just not good. I thought that the premise, the setup of it was kind of interesting, but the whole thing actually ended up just being kind of a setup for a joke, which typically I do like that in short films. I just think that they had an opportunity to take this particular story a little bit more seriously. And so even though I normally enjoy a short horror film that does feel self-aware and has some comedy, or it's basically just kind of one big joke, like one long setup to a punchline, this movie was not it. I did not like the punchline. I thought it was just really weird. Kind of felt more like a lazy cop-out move than a strategic and well thought out ending. So anyways, you can definitely skip that one, but moving on now to Mortal Kombat. Yes, I saw the Mortal Kombat that was just released. Washed up MMA fighter Cole Young, unaware of his heritage and hunted by Emperor Shang Tsung's best warrior Sub-Zero, seeks out and trains with Earth's greatest champions as he prepares to stand against the enemies of the Outworld in a high-stakes battle for the universe. So guess what? There actually is no high-stakes battle for the universe in this movie, because the whole movie is basically an advertisement for whatever franchise they want to start. Not successful. They did a bad job at concealing that. I only gave this movie 2 stars, and that's generous, okay? I promise you, this film really probably does not deserve 2 stars. The reason why I gave it 2 stars is because of some of the fights. It did take talent for these stunts people to do these things. I'm also an advocate for stunt people because there should be a stunts category at the Oscars, and it's not the stunts people's fault that this movie was bad. Even though the fights were probably the best part of this movie, even some of those were really underwhelming because the camera work wasn't very good. There were some cool moments that they were able to pull off, but for the most part, a lot of the fights, they definitely cheated. So when I say that, I mean that the camera angles were too zoomed in an effort to make the fight look real for the audience to actually kind of be able to gauge what was going on. And you do want to be very close to the action. You want an intimate, upfront experience to the fight, but you also don't want to be so close to it that all you see is just a mess and tangle of limbs and movement and stuff like that. And that's what was going on with Mortal Kombat, and that was literally the only reason that I watched this movie in the first place. So definitely a letdown, because the first fight was great. The choreography with like the camera people and the blocking with the fight and everything looked really good, so you could see everything and you had a really clear picture of the fight. So that got my hopes up, but then at the same time I was also thinking, wow, I would kind of rather be watching this movie, because the opening of the film actually takes place centuries before the rest of the film, but I was like, oh, maybe this is the story that I actually want to watch. Alas, I didn't get to do that, obviously. Another thing, too, is just that the writing was so unbelievably bad. The characters were awful. Almost none of them were likable because none of them were fleshed out. They relied on these action movie cliches that are just so tired at this point, and I was like, am I watching Suicide Squad or something? They even have this dickhead Australian guy that calls everybody mate, and I was like, wow, you guys just could not be more overtly ripping ripping off other films at this point. Also, they try to drop a lot of one-liners that, to be honest, if you replace them with a wet fart, I don't think anyone would notice. I promise that they are all jokes that you have heard before in action movies in the last 10 years. Just boring, not well thought out, not well written. And so that being said, I don't know if it's because the characters were so poorly written, but the acting was pretty bad too. So the only reason that I was really interested in watching these characters is because there are two of them that I would love to be sandwiched between and just let them give me kisses. That's the only reason I was interested in watching them. They were drier than... Why can't I think of anything dry right now? I want to say desert, but that's too easy. Drier than a Popeyes biscuit, maybe? I don't know. I've literally never tried one of those. That just felt culturally relevant. And the last thing that I'll mention that was just so bad about this movie was the story. Like I said, this whole thing is basically just an advertisement for the following sequels that are inevitably gonna come. I believe when they were making this film, they already knew that they were setting out to make a trilogy, so that's not good. Because as a standalone, this movie just does not work. But not only that, because there are so many contrivances in this movie. And we're literally talking about a movie that involves other realms. So already I'm suspending my disbelief because we're talking about something that is so fantastical, but even so, there was stuff that happened in the movie that just even in this world, there was no type of way that it made sense. I think one of the main problems is they do not establish the rules of the world. We have Cole, who is a fish out of water. He's our lead essentially. And so as he learns, we learn, but there are so many rules about the world that they don't establish. So something in particular happens in the end of the movie that just completely took me out. Because at this point, basically in the end of the movie, some rules should have been established as to why this particular thing happened, but it hadn't. It came out of left field and it was so unbearably stupid. So when I said that 2 stars was generous, I really meant that. I wanted to give this film 1 star. Up next was a rewatch for me, and I rewatched The Invisible Man. That was definitely an amazing palate cleanser after watching Mortal Kombat because I watched those on the same day. I give it 5 stars and a heart, and I just said on Letterboxd, it is the perfect film. Because I think it is. I really don't see anything that's wrong with that movie. At least not on a technical level. Maybe there are some parts of the story that you don't like or whatever. But on a technical level, at least, and also the acting performances and everything, I think it is a perfect film. After that, I watched Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, which I gave 4 stars, but I'll be talking about that in my series. Then after that, I watched The Strangers from 2008. Hopefully at this point, everybody knows that is one of the most famous home invasion movies of all time, right? I'm not gonna read the synopsis because it's just a very basic premise. And I'm sorry because I know that a lot of you guys like this movie. I only gave it 2 stars. I thought the characters were really strong and they did a good job of setting them up, and so we started to really care for these characters and their backstory and everything. But also at the same time with that, it took so long for anything to happen in this movie. And even in the moments of action, when the action was rising and things were getting a lot more tense, there were still so many dull moments where just nothing was going on. Like I was just waiting around for things to happen. And not in the traditional sense where, you know, it's obviously good to build tension, and then do a scare and kind of repeat that process. So they did that. It was just the fact that they spent so long building tension that it would just wear off for me. To the point where I was like, okay, any day now. I think I honestly just need to rewatch it when I'm home alone one night, maybe. Maybe then it would have more of my attention. I don't know. I just found it to be kind of a boring movie, which is weird because I'm scared of home invasions. It's one of the most likely things that could happen when we're talking about horror movie circumstance. So it was really weird that it wasn't effective for me. I think it was just because so much of it was so drawn out and dull, to be honest. I honestly do prefer a simple premise. I mean, that's why I really like the original Halloween movie, but sometimes there is a rare occasion when a simple concept kind of needs to be built upon and taken on from a more unique angle, because otherwise then I feel like the simplicity can kind of be its downfall because it just gets boring. And that's coming from someone that really loves a simple film, you know? I think it's honestly better when a film doesn't try too hard, but with this one I just I needed more from it. After that, I watched Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, which I actually also only gave 4 stars. Those last 2 movies of the franchise really do have some problems. That's why they're 4-star movies to me, and not 5. Because quite a few of the other movies in that series I do rate as 5 stars, but those last two, it's just, anyways, we'll get there when we get there. I need to wait and talk about those when I review them for my series. Up next, I watched the movie Hellraiser from 1987. An unfaithful wife encounters the zombie of her dead lover while the demonic Cenobites are pursuing him after he escaped their sadomasochistic underworld. Sadomasochistic, what a great word. So I gave this movie 2.5 stars. I felt like that was fair. I know that a lot of people like this movie, but also the people that like this movie can recognize that it's definitely not for everyone because it's super weird. I found it to be mediocre. I think a lot of it was just pretty messy. I honestly really loved the erotic overtones. I loved the practical effects. Those are honestly some of the best that I've ever seen. Definitely comparable to John Carpenter's The Thing. I thought this movie looked amazing. So for what it is, it being such a deeply erotic, dark work of art, I do appreciate it. I just think as a movie, it's not great. The plot is just super messy, but honestly, I do think it'll be a rewatchable one for me just because it is quite a sight to behold. That being said though, I'm not really interested in the franchise. I've been told that basically a lot of the sequels weren't even originally intended to be Hellraiser movies, but they were like, you know what, if we throw the Cenobites in this, then we could just call it a Hellraiser sequel. And I honestly got that vibe from this very first movie, because the premise of this woman encountering her dead lover and everything, that was kind of enough story for me. The Cenobites just like brought in this whole otherworldly vibe that I didn't find to be necessary. Like, they were super cool, but they didn't really benefit the story. I mean, in fact, they really just took me out of it because I was like, what the hell's going on here? So it's still a cool movie. I do appreciate it for what it is, but really I don't think that franchise is gonna be for me. I do recommend at least watching that first one once. I think it's one that you should watch before you die, but don't expect like a masterpiece, you know? One thing though that was such a standout in that movie besides the practical effects was the actress that played Christy. She was honestly way too good to be in that movie. I would love to know where she's at now because I don't know of any other projects she's done. Oh wait, did I say Christy? I meant Kirsty. Oops. I'm looking at all of her other movies and I just haven't heard of any of these, but I think she's so talented. Why doesn't she do more mainstream stuff? Anyways, she was a standout, but gonna move on to the next movie now. I watched this movie last night and it's called Swallow from 2019. This movie was actually also nominated for this poster in the Oscars, which check out the Oscars on my channel if you haven't yet. Hunter, a newly pregnant housewife, finds herself increasingly compelled to consume dangerous objects. As her husband and his family tighten their control over her life, she must confront the dark secret behind her new obsession. So this is definitely a drama movie, not really horror. There is a little bit of body horror in there, but not much. I posted about it on Twitter because within the first 5 minutes of watching this movie, I was like, oh, this is one of the most beautiful movies that I have watched in a very long time. So I gave it 4 stars because on all technical levels, this is an expertly well-made film, and it honestly just felt so effortless. It didn't feel like this movie was even trying too hard to look that good, and I mean, it does require a lot of time and dedication to pull off something like that, especially with the color palette being so consistent and all of the imagery being so consistent as well. I mentioned on Twitter that I love the use of the mirror imagery. That was a very constant theme throughout, so definitely a lot of thought behind this movie and had to give it points for that. I also felt like I related to Hunter, obviously not to the extreme level that she went through, but I think also just like the attention to detail and all these little things about this movie were so good. The reason why I related to her is because the man that she was with, the man that she had just married, was super rich and like his family was very controlling because obviously they want to maintain their image. And when you live in the world of nice little dinner parties and having all these rich friends and people around that all know your business, they pulled that off extremely well in the film. It felt so accurate. This was a very realistic and intimate portrayal of a woman going through like taking ownership of her life and her body, because oftentimes, and in recent years especially, I don't know why, but things like sexual assault in films are taken to this like girl boss level, and these girls become girl bosses to overcome sexual assault because man, bad girl boss. A perfect example is Promising Young Woman. That movie is garbage and you will not convince me otherwise. So anyways, for that reason, for the fact that it explored such dark themes in Swallow, at times it was hard to watch, not only because she was swallowing very weird things, but also because I related to Hunter and being with someone that had a very controlling family that really cared about their image. It's really, really difficult. Like, I don't think that that's something that's really talked about or explored as much much as it should be, because I feel like there are a lot of women that can relate to this, because really only in recent history have women been able to thrive on their own. And kind of looking at this movie through a more historical lens, it takes place in present day, but Hunter very much looks like a stereotypical kind of 50s housewife. And that's exactly what her husband wants her to be, and so all this level of control and stuff is what leads her to this issue. That's why I think it's such a wonderful exploration of this topic. I think the themes are treated really well, and again, it just feels so intimate. And again, I know that movie might not really be for everybody because intimate horror isn't necessarily everyone's thing, but if you're a woman especially, I would say consider watching this film. I think it's super worth it. I mean, obviously I give it 4 stars. I think it's a great movie. And the last movie that I'm going to talk about today is called Raw, that came out in 2016. It's a French film. In Justine's family, everyone is a vet and a vegetarian. She's a gifted teenager ready to take on her first year in vet school, where her older sister also studies. There she gets no time to settle. Hazing starts right away, and she is forced to eat raw meat for the first time in her life. Unexpected consequences emerge as her true self begins to form. This movie only received 1.5 stars from me. It made me nearly throw up, not once, not twice, but thrice. This is kind of a light spoiler, but honestly, I don't think that most of you are gonna watch this movie, so I feel okay talking about it, and really I'm not spoiling too much. But for some reason, I had got it into my head that I had signed up to watch a werewolf movie, and that's not what it was. This movie was about cannibalism, yes! And cannibalism is not for me, my dear children. No, it is not. I honestly can't even believe that I finished the movie, but I did. And very similarly to Swallow, this was about a young girl that was kind of embracing herself and coming into herself and figuring out who she was. But I don't really commend the movie for that, because that message was so muddled by all of the over-the-top gore and the shock value and stuff like that. The message, or whatever it was, definitely felt like it was taking a backseat to all the shock value. And so that's why I don't like when films try to kind of go under the guise of being like, oh, this is a story about women empowerment and stuff like that. Because no, it's not. No, it's not. You wanted to make a cannibalism film, and that's fine. Just don't make a super half-baked girl power movie in the process. Either take that theme all the way, or just focus on your shock value, because that's clearly what you want to do. I also want to give a trigger warning, because there is a moment in this movie when the main character basically sexually assaults somebody. I'm giving spoilers again because I don't think you should watch this movie. I don't think most people will. Most people don't even like international films anyways. But there's a moment in the film where the lead character is sleeping with her gay roommate, and that part is consensual. But then towards the end, she starts becoming way too aggressive, and she's starting to bite him and stuff, and she's on top, and he keeps saying, "Stop it," which very clearly means no. No means no. No means stop. Stop it means stop it. And she didn't. And so, what? I had no room for sympathy for our character after that moment. And I really don't like the way that it was kind of presented, because this whole movie seemed like it was kind of trying to be framed around the fact that she was learning who she was. But guess what? Fun fact, you don't need to sexually assault somebody in the process of doing that. I don't care if you think I'm embellishing, if you've seen the movie and you think I'm exaggerating, but how much clearer can it be if you're sleeping with someone and they say stop it and you don't? What else would you like me to call that? Sorry, I didn't mean to vent or get heated about that. I guess I was a little bit more angry than I thought I was. Oops. Need to just take it down a notch. I apologize. But that was unfortunately the last movie that I watched in April. I actually watched it this morning. That's honestly why these feelings are all so fresh and they're just bubbling up right now. This is again another one of the movies that I don't like, but honestly, if you like body horror and you're into cannibalism movies, you'd probably like it. It's just not one that was made for me, you know? I guess now is time for me to rank the top 5 movies that I watched this month. Oh, that's so hard to say because some of my favorite movies are on this. Okay, coming in at number 5, I think I would have to say Troll Hunter. I loved that movie so much. Definitely a lot of fun, good for a lot of laughs, amazing if you like found footage. Up next, I think that I would say Better Watch Out. That movie just surprised me in so many wonderful ways. It was such a fun film. After that, I would definitely have to say Orphan. I mean, again, the twist that movie took. It was a wild ride and I loved it. I'm definitely gonna try to find that one on DVD or Blu-ray. Coming in at number 2 would have to be Superbad. That's just one of my favorite comedy movies of all time, if not my favorite. So yeah, has to make its place at number 2. And then at number 1 would go to The Invisible Man because, like I said, it is essentially the perfect film. So there you have it. Those are the top 5 movies that I watched in April. Definitely prioritize those if you haven't seen any of them, or don't, you know, do whatever you want. I hope that you found all these movies interesting, and definitely let me know down below what movies you'd like me to watch and talk about next month. I'm always taking your recommendations. In fact, I post about it on Instagram a lot. I'm always asking you guys which movie I should watch, and that's almost always how I choose which movies I'm gonna watch on a certain day. So thank you, by the way, for those of you that engage with me over on Instagram. But I think with this video and part 1, those are the comments I'm gonna be looking to most to see what I should watch next month, so definitely comment down below. It also helps me out with the algorithm, if you know what I mean. That and liking the video would super appreciate if you did that as well. And if you're new here and you made it to the end of the video, then definitely consider clicking subscribe, because, you know, you made it through a whole video, why not? I promise I do deliver on my other content. There's a lot of good stuff, so just check me out. If you'd like even more content from me, I also have a vlog channel. There's a lot of miscellaneous content over there, and I also have a Patreon. That and all my social media will be linked down below. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!